What's up, guys? So today I'm going to be taking you step by step through how I make my thumbnails, and hopefully this can help you make yours a little bit better. I'm going to be using Photoshop. If you don't have Photoshop, just get Photoshop. It's really not that expensive, and if you really care about your YouTube videos and your thumbnails, it's worth it. All right, let's get into the video.
I like that.
All right, so the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to hop in game so we can get a few screenshots to bring into Photoshop. So first off, we're going to go to our graphics and we're going to boost that shit to the highest it can go. I'm talking 200 render resolution, high or as high as it goes on every setting, because you want the game to look as pretty as possible. FPS does not matter. So once you have that, what I like to do is I like to go to the map Hovek Sawmill because it has really nice lighting, and there's also a certain crate that I like to jump onto to grab the screenshot of the weapon. We also want to make it hardcore, so we do not have any HUD making the screen look ugly. And the last thing you want to do is you want to make sure you have the weapon selected in your loadouts ready to go. For me, I'm going to use the Kilo today. One of the first things I'll do is I'll just inspect the gun, and I always have the sun pointing at the gun and hitting it, so when I hold it up, it shimmers in the light. That's a nice way to do it. We'll just do that a couple times here. And instead of just recording this and then screenshotting it later, I like to screenshot during it and taking just a photo because the quality is a little bit better than just going back to a video, pausing on a frame, and then screenshotting over that. So that's what I'll do here. I'll just grab a screenshot. Then I like to head over to a crate where you can trigger a jumping animation where you hold the gun a little bit higher up to show more of the body of it. And that crate is right here. I like this crate because the sun hits it at a nice angle and you get something like that. So I'll just trigger the jump and I'll just hit the screenshot hotkey a bunch of times. I use Shadow Play for this, by the way. You can use any program that you want. And I just continue to do that until I feel like I have a good one. And yeah, now we are ready to grab the background image that we will use. All right, so the next step is to choose a different map, or it could be the same map, depending on what you want the background image to be, and then switching to Codecaster. Sweet, so once you're in game, you just find a spot that you like, you think has a good look to it, and then you simply screenshot the image when you're ready to. I usually take quite a few, just so I have options when I get into Photoshop. And yeah, this is pretty much the process of capturing a background image that's high quality. I apologize for the FPS being so low, but that's just because all my graphics are boosted to the max. Okay, sweet. So once you have all the images that you wanted to get, we can now hop into Photoshop and start the process of making the thumbnail. Okay, sweet. So once we are in Photoshop, we are going to now cut out this gun from this image. And there are many ways to do this, but the best way and the highest quality way is to use the pen tool. So that's what we're going to do. I'm going to start at the bottom here, and there's a few controls when using this pen. It's pretty straightforward. You just click and go. But if you want to make a curve, you click and hold, and you use your mouse to just, the wider you spread it, the sharper the curve will be, and you just kind of do a really good job of lining up the edge line of your image. And then when you want to move this, you hold Alt and click on it, and you can drag it to the next spot so it doesn't mess up your line flow. And you just continue just like that. Make sure to get really close and zoom in. Another control is holding Control and clicking on these dots, the square, if you want to move it, and you can move it a pixel over. And you pretty much just continue this process throughout the entire weapon. You really want to take your time on this section because this is one of the most important parts. So don't worry about going fast or don't worry about taking too long. The slower you do this and the better you do this, the better the image will look in the end. Right, so once you've outlined the first section of it, which is just the outside, we now have to look at the inside portions and do that next. So you look over here, you see the site. This little blue area needs to be cut out as well. So all you have to do is just start going again. Once you've closed that circle on the first loop, you're gonna go and start this one. And don't worry, that one's still there. It's pretty hard to see, but it's still there. Don't worry about that one disappearing if you start a second one. And we're just going to continue doing that for all the little sections of this image that are peeking through on the inside of the gun. Right, so I think that is everything. So now the next step is you're just going to go over to paths right here. You're going to hold Control and click on the little image. And what that's going to do is it's going to turn this, all those pen strokes, into a selection. You're going to go back to your layers. You're going to unlock it if it's still locked. And you're simply going to hit Control J. And what that does is that creates a new layer with the selection. So if I hide this, this is all you see. Now there's one more step that we're going to do, which just cleans this up just a little bit more than it already is. And that's we're going to hold Control and click on this again to select the image. And we're going to go up to Select, Modify, Contract, and we're going to contract the image by 1 pixel. So press OK, and then before you click anything else, hit Control J again to create a new layer. And you'll see here when I hide the old layer like this, you can see how it just takes the edge off the image just a little bit, makes it just a little bit cleaner. You see before and after, before and after. It just looks a little bit better. Okay, now we can move on to the background. Oh, before we do anything else, it's always good to save this image. We can delete these 2 layers. It's always good to save this image just so you have this if you ever want to use this again on a different thumbnail. So let's do that really quick. Okay, so now that we have our background image selected, the first things we're going to need to do is to get rid of the allegiance and the coalition FPS and latency information at the top here, because nobody wants to look at that. So what I like to do is I go to the spot healing brush right here, and I simply just hold shift. I click one part, hold shift, and then drag it across. I'm going to cut most of this sky out, so I am not worried about this. You could take your time and really correct this here if you really wanted these lines to stay straight. But I am going to cut the sky out, so I'm not worried about that. So I just want to get it out of the image. And the main reason I'm doing this is, if I'm going to cut this out, is because if I add things like motion blur or radial blur, and I use this image, and I've already used a spot healing brush, the things that you have spot healed will start to show through if you add those types of motion blur. So for example, on this little section here, I needed to get them removed, but if I even though I'm cutting the sky out, that section there at the top right here needs to look clean when I start adding the blur. So we've gotten that information out, and what we're going to do is instead of just using this image here, we're going to save it out as a PNG, and that way it'll flatten the image and start from scratch, and there'll be no history on the image. So let's just save that somewhere. And so we will just bring that back into Photoshop, and we can close the one we were just working in. No, I don't need to save, and this is the image. So now it's time to open our project, and I have a set template for that. As you should, if you're working in YouTube thumbnails, you have to do it a certain way. So you can create a template in Photoshop, and I just use this every single time I'm making a thumbnail. So the template is 1280 by 720 height, pixels, resolution is 300, and then I just throw a black background on, but it doesn't really matter what you use because you won't see it anyways. It'll be covered by other layers. So we're just going to open that, and I'm basically just going to drag my 2 images, Control A to select this entire image, Control C to copy it, and then I'm going to come here and hit Control V. Go like that. Now, the first thing you want to do when you're starting a project and you have all your assets ready to go is you want to turn each image into a smart object. And what that does is Photoshop works using pixels. So if I take an image and I make it really big and then make it really small and then try to make it really big again, it's going to look super distorted and pixelated. So how to avoid that and be able to just transform my image in any way that I'd like, I simply right click on the layer and hit convert to smart object, and you'll see a little symbol pop up on the image so you know that it's a smart object. And I'm going to do that for both layers, and that just gives me the freedom to hit Control T on both of these layers and make them tiny and hit enter, and make them big again and hit enter, and the quality is still the same. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to hide the gun because we are going to focus on the background first. We're just going to zoom that out, make this smaller, something like that. So one of the things that I like doing, which adds a little bit of originality and makes the photo look a little bit spicier, is adding a different sky. Because the sky is obviously pretty boring here. There's no clouds in it. It's just a flat blue color. So I find cool images online of different skies with cool clouds, cool coloring, and I simply cut out the sky from this background image and input the new one. So we're going to do that now the same way that we did the gun. We're simply going to select the pen tool again and come up here and start cutting. Okay, once you have all of the pen work done, go to Paths, hold Control and click on the image, go back to Layers. We're going to right click on the layer and we're going to hit Rasterize Layer, which basically turns it off from being a smart object momentarily. And then we are going to simply hit Delete. Now, this has gotten rid of the sky, but as you can see, there's still a few little bits, and I'm being picky here, but a little bit of blue here and there. So all we're going to do is we're going to go to Select, inverse the selection, which pretty much instead of selecting the sky, we are now selecting the foreground, and go to Select, Modify Selection, Contract by 1. Yes, hit OK, and then hit Control J, which creates a new layer. And now you can see the difference between this, where the blue is pointing out, especially in this area up here, to that, where it just looks a little bit cleaner. We're going to delete the old layer. And now we have a good foreground image. And before we move forward, we want to make sure to convert that back into a smart object so we can make it bigger or smaller. All right, so once we have the photo of a sky that we like, we have that in Photoshop. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to convert to a smart object. And then just going to drag that below our layer. And it looks like that. Looks super clean and a lot more interesting than the last image. So now we can work on the gun. I'm going to size this down a little bit. Oops. Something like that. That looks pretty nice. So now this is the section where you can kind of be creative and do your own thing. So there's a few things that I like to do. I'm going to take the layer of the background and the sky, and I'm just going to merge these layers. So it's just one image. And I like to add some blur to the background. And personally, I think radial blur looks really nice. So I'm going to add that radial blur. I usually do about 10 to 15. Let's go with 12. And I do zoom. You can do spin, and you always want to do best quality. Click OK. That turns the background into that. Clean. So the next thing we can do is I always like to add a little bit of sharpness to the foreground gun. Makes it pop a little more. So after selecting the layer, we're going to go to Filter, go to Sharpen, and Sharpen More. That looks nice. It's a little much. So we're going to go below the layer and double click here. And we're just going to bring the opacity down just a little bit, just so it's not so intense. Let's add in some lightning effects. Now, the homie Kodex was nice enough to hook up this lightning pack for me, which has different styles of lightning for me to use. But I'm sure you can find this online. And if you've reached the point in this video where you're thinking to yourself, holy shit, this is a lot of work and I don't want to do any of this, definitely reach out to Kodex. I'll have his information in the bio. He makes amazing thumbnails and he'd be happy to make thumbnails for your videos if doing all this does not sound appealing to you. Do one of these. So I'm simply going to drag this into here. Now this already comes in as a smart object, so I do not need to turn it into a smart object. Sweet, so I want this to cross in front of the gun here, but go behind my hand and then reappear up here. So I'm just going to hit E on my keyboard, which brings up my eraser tool. And then doing this and just clicking on the image will convert it back to a non-smart image. I'm gonna go to my eraser settings, make sure I'm on a hard round brush. And by holding Alt and right click and dragging, you can make it your size bigger or smaller. So that's Alt, hold right click, and then drag. Or you can come up here and just simply change the size, but it's a lot easier to just do this. So basically what I'm gonna do here is I'm going to, on this level, I'm gonna turn down the opacity quite a bit so I can see the background. I'm just going to take the eraser tool and simply erase. Just like that. Just where it should be going behind the gun. Just like that. So if I turn up the opacity now, it looks like that. Very nice. So we're going to go back to lightning. Let's see here. And add this one too. And it's Control T for transform to bring up this box here where I can edit the size of it. And if you want more options while in this mode, just right click and you have scale, rotate, skew, perspective, distort, rotate, flip horizontal, warp, flip vertical, and all those other options. Then we'll do the same thing. We're going to press E again for eraser. I'm going to turn down the opacity so I can see it better. And we're simply going to start erasing. Cool, so now we're going to turn the opacity back up and it looks something like that. That's looking really clean so far. I think we're going to need a little bit more on the back here. So let's go back here. Okay, what do we have down here? Ooh, this is a nice one. Perfect. Bring that back in. Control T. Something like that maybe. How are we feeling about that? That looks pretty nice. Okay, so let's work on the gun layer now. So I'm going to add, I always add a brightness layer and a vibrance layer. And we want these layers to only affect, we want the vibrance one and the brightness contrast one to only affect the gun layer. If I mess with the brightness now, because it's on top of the background layer as well, it will mess with the entire image. We don't want that. So we're gonna hold Alt and you'll see this little drop down arrow. We're gonna click that and it's going to attach the vibrance and the brightness to the layer right below it. So now when I hit brightness and I bring it up, it only affects the foreground image and not the background image. So we're gonna boost the brightness a little bit, mess with the contrast. It's always fun to mess with contrast because it just kind of makes the image have a little more depth. Bring up the brightness a little bit. And then we're gonna go into vibrance. And vibrance is not the same as saturation. It's a little bit different. I like it more than saturation. It's just a softer way to boost the colors. So I'm pretty generous with the vibrance. Usually I have vibrance at 100 just because it's so clean. We are going to add a new layer So come down here, new layer. And basically what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add some glow to the gun. So on this new layer, we're going to hit B on the keyboard or come over here, select your brush tool. We're going to go to soft light. And we're going to hold Alt. And you see this little eyedropper come by. And we're just going to select the purple color. And we're just going to click like that. And it's just going to make maybe a little brighter. You're going to mess with the colors. Yeah, just like that. We're just going to do that across the gun a little bit. Just to make it really pop. Sweet. So now we're going to mess with the background layer. So again, brightness and contrast and a vibrance layer. And we're just going to hold Alt and pin those two to the image. Now we're going to mess with the brightness a little bit, bring the brightness up, mess with the contrast so the colors pop a little better, and hit it with some vibrance. Just like that. To 100. I like vibrance, as you can tell. So once you've reached this point, it's always good to save. So you have all the layers set up. So I'm going to save as. Now, after I've saved, I'm going to flatten the image. So that flattens all the layers into one image. And I'm going to add in a lens flare, which is something I like doing because it adds a little depth to the photo and just makes it a little more interesting. But filter, go down to render and hit lens flare. Now the reason I'm doing this now when the image is flat is so the lens flare affects the entire flat image. If I were to do this on top of one of the layers, it would only affect either the gun or the background. So now you can kind of get creative with this. There's no like right way to do this. You kind of want to go on what's realistic, but there's no part of the sun hitting the gun right now. So I kind of just do whatever until I get something that feels right. Sometimes I like to add it in as if it's the sun. I'll go like that, which that looks all right. I'm not crazy about it, but anyways, you can mess with that, but that's always good. And there's different kinds of lens flares. Come back here. There's this lens flare, which looks like that. There's a 35mm, which is very similar looking. 105, which is a lot brighter, and then Movie Prime, which adds these cool little line effects. You can get creative with that and do whatever you'd like. Now, the last step is to mess with the final colors of the image. So we're going to go into Filter, and we're going to go Camera Raw Filter. And basically what that brings up is this, where you have a bunch of options here. I'll move this so you can actually see. You have a bunch of options on the side here. Basic, you have your exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, vibrance, saturation, texture. Then you go down, color grading, you can mess with that, color mixer, your details. So I'm going to do that on a different monitor simply because my other monitor is better suited for color correction. But you have that option there to mess around with your final coloring of the image. Great. So after all of that, we are left with this image, which is the final image that I'm going to go with. This is not my best work that I've ever done, not my best thumbnail, but I made this video so you guys could understand the process of how I make my thumbnails and you could learn something along the way so your thumbnails just become a lot better and higher quality. If you guys enjoyed the video, make sure to drop a like, subscribe, and if you have any questions, put them in the comments down below. All right, thanks guys. Peace.